The Power of Levitation. In 2019, a group of scientists at Columbia University made an incredible discovery. A discovery that might prove ancient structures around the world were built using levitation. The university scientists learned that sound waves are able to carry gravitational mass. Very specific sound waves can generate their own gravitational field. What this means is that sound can carry energy, aka weight. Researchers aren't quite sure how to do it yet, but they've proven that it is possible. Harnessing the power of sound could allow humans to move extremely heavy objects without any kind of equipment. But could ancient people have already known this thousands of years ago? What if levitation was used to build everything from the pyramids to Stonehenge? Scientists to this day cannot understand how the blue stones were transported to Stonehenge across 140 miles of rough terrain. But if the ancients had somehow understood how to generate a gravitational field using sound, transporting 6-ton stones wouldn't have been that difficult. The same goes for the pyramid builders. Forget ramps and pulley systems. If the Egyptians knew how to master sound waves, they could have levitated the great stone blocks to the tops of the pyramids with ease. There wouldn't have been any need for some complex system of ramps and ropes. Keep in mind, this is all theoretical. Archaeologists have already found evidence of ramps and canals at the pyramids that were used for transporting the stones. Plus, there isn't any mention of using levitation in Egyptian texts. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. Pumapunku, Baalbek, Teotihuacan, all these places may have been built by ancient humans with a profound understanding of sound. In Lebanon's Temple of Jupiter, there are 3 megalithic stones weighing an astonishing 1,000 tons each. Even modern machinery would struggle to move these things. But if sound could be channeled to make stones levitate, maybe that was how the ancients did it. What do you think of this theory? Let me know in the comments below. The Chamber of the Scythians. Near the Russian city of Stavropol, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary during the development of a power line in 2013. In the Caucasus Mountains, the old stomping ground of nomadic warriors, workers stumbled upon a burial mound. This was no ordinary burial site. It was a Scythian kurgan, a discovery made maybe once every century. It was buried deep beneath the mountain, accessible through a long-forgotten opening. When archaeologists first entered the tomb, they were practically drooling because they assumed it would be full of treasure. Unfortunately, the burial chamber had already been looted. There was nothing good to find. Except there was. Archaeologists just had to look a little harder. More recently, researcher Andrei Belinsky brought his team to the burial mound in the mountain and took a more thorough look around. Sure enough, they found what all the looters who came before them had missed. At the bottom of the burial chamber was a hidden rectangular doorway covered by a thick layer of clay. They broke through the sealed entrance and entered a hidden chamber even deeper in the mountain. Nobody had entered this chamber for 2,400 years. It was chock full of amazing treasure and incredible secrets. While excavations were ongoing, the existence of the chamber was kept hidden from the public. The team didn't want anyone learning of the treasures and looting the place. When they were finally done, the team had an unbelievable stash of goods shedding light on the mysterious world of the Scythian nomads. It turns out ancient Greek historian Herodotus was right. The horse lords of the steppes did indeed partake in drug-fueled rituals. Inside the mountain chamber were golden vessels, bracelets, about 7 pounds of gold, neck rings, normal rings, and tons of other valuables. Researchers also discovered some strange black residue inside one of the gold vessels. An analysis of the substance confirmed it to be a mix of opium and cannabis. The Scythians didn't just smoke weed, they smoked weed and did opium at the same time. This was an astonishing find because Herodotus wrote about it 2,500 years ago. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Scythians smoked a substance no Greek could handle. The hardcore drug habits of the Scythians was just one revelation. Researchers found a vessel decorated with the image of an old bearded man mercilessly slaying a young man. This could be proof of a war long believed to be nothing but a myth. According to legend, the Scythians went to war against the Persians for 28 long years. When the survivors of the bloody war returned to their homeland, they found a generation of young men living with their wives and tilling their land. While they were away, their wives had borne children with their captured slaves, and a whole generation had grown up. This was the start of what is known as the Bastard Wars. The old war-hardened Scythians brutally massacred the youths who had grown up in their land, treating them as intruders. Up until this tomb was found, the Bastard Wars were little more than a myth. Mysteries below Greece. Scientists have harnessed the power of cosmic rays to unearth a mysterious chamber from the days of ancient Greece. A muographic scan of a Greek necropolis has revealed what appears to be an isolated burial chamber, a chamber so deep that researchers can't even confirm the discovery. Let me start by explaining the necropolis itself. It's hidden underneath a bustling area of modern Naples in Italy. Much of the necropolis has already been studied. Archaeologists have found plenty of beautiful frescoes that were installed by wealthy Greek families 2,600 years ago. Between 600 and 200 BC, give or take a few years, Naples was the Greek city of Neapolis. The city thrived above and below ground. The Greeks built amazing temples and beautiful public spaces, and they dug creepy graveyards like worker termites beneath the city. Plus, they had complex aqueduct systems for moving water, many of which were underground as well. These days, many of the ancient Greek structures survive underground. Bomb shelters from World War II and water cisterns from the Middle Ages connected tombs built hundreds of years before the birth of Christ. It's a mishmash of histories connected through crumbling passageways and dark tunnels. Researchers wanted to learn even more. To get a true understanding of the buried world beneath Naples, they turned to cosmic rays. Scientists from Italy and Japan used laser scans and muon detectors to study cosmic rays colliding with particles. This simple version of the highly complex science is that the cosmic rays can be measured to get a 3D view of the underground site. It took about a month of work, with a pair of muon detectors placed in an ancient chamber 60 feet below ground. The final 3D scan revealed a mysterious chamber in the middle of the buried necropolis that scientists are clueless about. The empty space is enormous but totally inaccessible. There are no stairs leading to it, nor any known tunnels. Researchers think it could be a burial chamber, but there's no way for them to reach it. What do you think is hiding underneath Naples? Let me know in the comments. Nikola Tesla, the pyramids, and missing files. After the great inventor Nikola Tesla was discovered dead in his hotel room in 1943, the United States government seized his documents. The inventor, prolific, brilliant, and a little erratic, had his files pillaged. Maybe it was because he had invented a particle beam weapon straight out of Star Trek, a weapon known only as the Death Ray. Or maybe it was because of his bizarre obsession with the Egyptian pyramids. Nikola Tesla is famous today, but was overwhelmingly unappreciated while alive. Now he's credited with inventing everything from smartphones to Wi-Fi and so much more. There are many who believe Tesla's brilliance has never again been reached by any other human. He had a very unusual way of thinking, which allowed him to create all these inventions. It was his unique mind that had him interested in other fields as well. Some of what Tesla was interested in could be considered esoteric. The pyramids were his greatest obsession. He believed the pyramids were not merely tombs for ancient pharaohs. He thought they could have been used as giant energy transmitters. As he grew older, he became more convinced that the pyramids were used for sending energy wirelessly. His love for the mystery of the pyramids soon blended with his technological advancements. In 1905, Tesla filed a patent in the United States. It was a patent for transmitting electrical energy through the natural medium. Tesla figured he had come across a way to design generators that would suck energy out of the world's ionosphere. It was his opinion that the planet itself could produce an unlimited amount of energy. Pyramids could be created that would tap into that energy field, allowing anyone, at any place in the world, to have free, limitless energy. It sounds like a utopian dream, but what if he was right? What if Nikola Tesla understood what the Egyptians understood thousands of years ago? That energy can be extracted endlessly from the world and stored in natural stone pyramids. It would be a revelation that would put energy companies out of business. Why would anyone need to pay for energy when they could get it for free from the planet? Why pay for air to breathe? There are many who believe upon Tesla's death, the US government took his studies on pyramid energy and destroyed them. Also that nobody would ever harm the fossil fuel industry. Minoan star paths. The Minoan civilization was one of the most brilliant in all of human history. They flourished on the Greek island of Crete starting around 2600 BC. They were a mighty Bronze Age people who excelled in art, science, and literature. They are most famous today for the mythical King Minos and his Minotaur. The Minoans appear regularly throughout Greek mythology, but they were more than just people who told strange stories about beasts and kings. They also made major strides in architecture, engineering, and other forms of technology. A new study has shown the Minoans may have figured out how to use the stars to travel vast distances across the sea. It's believed they used similar celestial navigation techniques to the ones used by the Polynesians on the other side of the world. To figure out just how well the Minoans could track the stars, scientists turned to the ruins of their palaces. They found that all the most important ruins on Crete seemed to be aligned to navigational directions. The great central courts of demolished palaces are oriented north-south along the axis. Many palaces were oriented toward the rising or setting of navigational stars. With such an impressive understanding of celestial navigation, the Minoans must have been excellent sailors. The study suggests they used star paths, or specific star groups and constellations, to travel effortlessly between cities anywhere on the Mediterranean Sea. Now let me give you an example so that you understand what I'm talking about. One star path is Spica, found within the constellation Virgo. Spica has a direct route between Knossos, the largest palace ever built by the Minoans, and the ancient trading center of Sidon in what is now Lebanon. The star path cuts through the middle of the central courtyard with perfect accuracy. This shows the Minoans built their palaces in harmony with the stars above. Talk about innovation. The cure for malaria. Let me introduce you to Tuyoyo, the woman who changed science by discovering ancient secrets. Tuyoyo won the Nobel Prize by using ancient medical texts from 3 different Chinese dynasties to discover a cure for malaria. Before digging into the ancient secrets, I want to tell you about this scientist because she is a truly remarkable woman. She was born in 1930 on the east coast of China in the city of Ningbo. Tuyoyo was a genius from a young age, though she had to take a brief break at the age of 16 because she contracted tuberculosis. When she recovered and went back to school, she knew what her life goal was. She wanted to discover cures for horrible diseases that affected millions of people. Tuyoyo proceeded to study at Beijing Medical College, learning all about pharmacology and medicinal plants. She graduated in 1955 at the young age of 24. In 1959, she began to seriously study traditional Chinese medicine. This was what ultimately brought her to the ancient texts. But there were some other things going on as well that you might be interested to know about. North Vietnam was having a horrible problem with malaria in the 1960s. They asked China for help. The Vietnam War was causing casualties, and malaria was making things significantly worse. Chairman Mao Zedong launched Project 523 in 1967 to discover a cure for malaria. At 39 years old, Tuyoyo was made the head of the project in 1969. She and her team turned to medical texts written thousands of years ago to understand how traditional Chinese fought off malaria. By the early 1970s, 240,000 compounds had already been tested for potential anti-malarial drugs. Scientists were trying everything they could think of, but nothing was working. The ancient texts changed all that. Tuyoyo and her team investigated manuscripts written as far back as the Zhou dynasty 3,000 years ago. One of the books they found very helpful was Jay Hong's A Handbook of Prescriptions for Emergencies, written in the Jin dynasty around 317 AD. The ancient book mentions something called sweet wormwood, a natural ingredient used 1,600 years ago to effectively treat malaria. Sure enough, the book was right. Wormwood turned out to have a 100% success rate. It took 2 decades to convince the global community, but finally, the World Health Organization accepted wormwood as the best defense against malaria. Millions of people have been saved over the last half-century, all because of Tuyoyo's commitment and the amazing knowledge of the ancients. The Norte Chico culture. Forget about the Inca Empire. Today I want to show you the oldest and most impressive civilization in Peru. The Norte Chico culture is not only the oldest known civilization in Peru, but also the oldest known civilization in the Americas. They appeared on the scene around 3500 BC and thrived for an estimated 2,000 years. You may have heard them referred to as the Caral Supe civilization. No matter what you want to call them, they were complex geniuses active around the same time as Sumer and the earliest Egyptians. The Norte Chico civilization is an unusual enigma. They created some of the most spectacular monumental structures in the Americas. I'm talking about pyramids, gigantic plazas, huge platform mounds, and vast cities. Yet scientists have never found any examples of ceramics or complex art. They were amazing builders but seem to have lacked artistic creativity, at least according to the archaeological record. The civilization was located all along the west coast of Peru. Most of the ancient cultures preferred to live in the Andean highlands, up in the mountains and above the Amazon. But the Norte Chico were all about those beaches. They even came up with unique technologies that allowed them to thrive on the coast and in the vast desert plains. Inventions like irrigation systems to bring water from the Andean highlands down into the otherwise barren deserts where their cities stood. The Norte Chico never had a writing system in the traditional sense. They didn't have paper, nor did they make clay tablets, but they were spectacular with textiles. They were the ones who invented the quipu. The quipu was a type of information recording system that used knots and fabric. Instead of etching words into stone using symbols, the Norte Chico figured out how to create a writing system using knots and various lengths of thread. It seems crazy to think about, but it worked. This method worked so well that it was the standard technique used by the Inca 3,000 years later. 500 years ago, when the Inca Empire was active, most civilizations had figured out writing. But after thousands of years, the civilizations of Peru were still using knots and fabrics. It wasn't that they couldn't figure out a system of writing, but rather they didn't need to because they had the quipu and it worked. If that's not some genius inventing, I don't know what is. I may as well tell you about the decline of the Norte Chico culture while you're here and invested. Around 1800 BC, something horrible happened. This civilization, inarguably brilliant and one of the most sophisticated ever, had not experienced violence in nearly 2,000 years. There has been no evidence ever found of war being waged, despite there being over 30 major cities within the empire. But in 1800 BC, the Norte Chico disappeared. Nobody knows what happened. The cities became deserted, perhaps because of conflict or drought and starvation or disease. The next great civilization didn't appear in Peru for another 1,000 years, and they still weren't as brilliant as the Norte Chico. What do you think happened? Let me know in the comments. The cradle of warfare. Mesopotamia is celebrated today as the cradle of civilization. What a lot of people don't know is that it was also the cradle of military warfare. Ancient Mesopotamians may have been the first people to strap a horse to a wagon and charge at their enemies. Around 2000 BC, warfare changed forever when Mesopotamians came up with the idea for chariot battles. Assyrians had all the ingredients to be excellent fighters. They had the wheel, they had spears, arrows, and they had horses. They put them all together to create chariots. One guy would drive, another would shoot arrows, and a third might spear enemies with a long lance. They maximized mobility and speed to devastate their enemies. They even knew how to use inflated sheepskins and a barge to float chariots across the river. Not to mention the psychological impact of a chariot charge being unleashed on a group who hadn't even invented the wheel yet. One of the reasons Mesopotamia remained such an unstoppable powerhouse was their military might. Regardless of which civilization you point at, Akkad, Sumer, Babylon, they were all military monsters. One reason was the chariot. Another was siege warfare. Military engineers designed siege towers very early in the history of Mesopotamia. This made large walls useless in an invasion. Battering rams were employed to break down wooden gates. Siege warcraft meant no city in the Near East was safe. The Romans may have even taken a lesson out of the Mesopotamians' book on strategy. Mesopotamians were extremely well organized. They organized their armies into specific units based on skills and weapons used. They also had a military hierarchy that demanded perfection on the battlefield. They were able to adapt to tough situations and be tactically wise in every scenario. But what about the weapons and armor? Well, it didn't start out very advanced. 5,000 years ago, soldiers used simple slings and heavy sticks. But then, in 2500 BC, bronze revolutionized war. Soldiers now had access to swords and daggers, and they had helmets, shields, and bronze body armor. By 1200 BC, iron had taken over for bronze. Weapons were incredibly durable, and soldiers could protect themselves under sheets of pounded iron. Ancient Egypt and electric cars. A team of scientists working closely with chemical engineers from Johns Hopkins University are trying to make better fuel cells for future electric cars. They are drawing their inspiration from ancient Egyptian gilding. Gilding is when you cover cheap metal in a thin layer of fancy metal, usually gold. During the days of King Tut, 3,300 years ago, Egyptian artisans covered copper with a thin layer of precious metal to make all their greatest works of art. Extravagant masks and beautiful sets of jewelry were crafted using cheap material, then gilded with gold to appear hugely valuable. It's true that gilding has come a long way since the days of King Tut. Tiny coatings of platinum can be as thin as 1 nanometer, which is 100,000 times thinner than a strand of human hair. The microscopic gilding that happens today is a crucial part of making pretty much everything electronic, including fuel cells for electric cars. But even with recent advancements in technology, scientists have turned to ancient Egypt for inspiration. One of the most important materials around today is platinum, but it's wildly expensive, which makes it impractical to use fuel cells. At the same time, it's a necessary evil since it's needed as a catalyst. Researchers copy the Egyptians by gilding a very thin layer of platinum over a much cheaper layer of cobalt. They were surprised to find the mix performed even better than using only platinum. With the Egyptian technique of gilding, the cobalt-platinum combo worked 10 times better than ordinary platinum. The Egyptians may not have been gilding on a microscopic level, but they were still metallurgic geniuses. The Chola Dam. The Chola Dam in India is 1,079 feet long and 66 feet wide. It isn't particularly impressive by modern standards, but it is a big dam spread across the Kaveri River. It's used to scatter water over 1,544 square miles of land. Looking at it for yourself, you might think it's a modern engineering marvel, but the structure is really an ancient feat of ingenuity. The Chola Dam has been used for the past 2,000 years. It's one of the oldest dams on the planet, and it's still in use right now. The dam was built in 190 AD at the height of the Roman Empire. Legend has it, King Karikala Chola of the Chola dynasty commissioned the dam to be built. He was having a very successful run as king. Karikala grew wealthy from trade and enjoyed several military victories. He even opened up trading routes to the Roman Empire, helping to grow India's economy. Karikala was unique in that instead of squandering money on his own selfish desires, he put the money earned through trade and conquest back into the economy. Karikala funded wars and construction projects, and one of those construction projects was the Chola Dam. There is still a statue of Karikala Chola standing at one end of the dam. Just in case someone forgets who the mastermind was. There is one rather dark aspect to the story, though. Sinhalese captives were brought back to Chola and forced to build the dam as slaves. It worked as a check dam, diverting the flow of the river and protecting the people from floods. The water flowed into man-made irrigation canals to assist with crop growth. The dam continued functioning without much upkeep for about 1,500 years. No big changes were made until the British showed up and started to modernize the dam in the 1800s. They did make some changes, but the dam is largely the same now as it's always been. The everyday saw. Technology may have advanced, but the human brain hasn't moved on much in the last 2,500 years. In the ancient city of Hattusa, archaeologists came across a tool that wouldn't look out of place in any modern garage. They found an everyday saw that looks about the same as what you can buy at the hardware store right now. Hattusa was once the capital of the mighty Hittite Empire. It's popular among scholars for its urban organization. Temples, royal housing, and fortresses were built in a shockingly organized fashion. The city still holds the remnants of massive gates from which visitors entered the guarded capital. The city is so old and so important, it boasts the UNESCO World Heritage title of Memory of the World. The cuneiform script found within the ruins represents the oldest known form of any Indo-European language. Then there's this random saw. Professor Dr. Andreas Schachner says it doesn't differ much from the ones used today. The iron is a bit thicker, but otherwise it's just like any modern tool. The professor says it goes to show that humans don't modify working tools. When there is something useful that works well, humans leave it alone. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Perfect teeth in Pompeii. Have you ever smiled at yourself in the mirror and wished you had better teeth? The people of Pompeii certainly didn't. Prior to the eruption in 79 AD that destroyed the Roman city, Pompeians enjoyed perfect teeth. Scientists have taken CT scans of countless corpses found across the ruins of Pompeii. Every single one has been found with perfect teeth. But why? How? What did they know that we don't? When Mount Vesuvius blew its top, the people of Pompeii were buried under a blanket of ash. They suffocated and died, and their flesh rotted underneath inside the pumice shells. But their bones and teeth were left in pristine condition. In the 19th century, archaeologists working at Pompeii started pouring plaster into the hollow pumice shells, creating casts of the dead. More recently, researchers focused on the teeth of the dead people. Modern technology allowed researchers to scan and print the casts. After studying a few dozen examples, a pattern became clear. There was almost no evidence of cavities. The people of Pompeii had exceptionally healthy teeth, almost no decay or rot whatsoever. Was it because they were always at the dentist? Did Pompeians have advanced dental technology that kept their mouths in super condition? Scientists don't think it was that complicated. Dental surgeon Elisa Vanacore said it was because of their diet. The people of Pompeii ate fresh fruits and vegetables and no refined sugar, meaning they had nothing at all to rot their teeth. They likely didn't even realize why their teeth were so healthy. The people who lived in Pompeii were richer than in other parts of the empire, so they could afford healthier foods that didn't hurt their teeth. They must have thought having beautiful teeth was just part of having lots of money. Predicting robots. The ancient Greeks may have predicted the rise of robots and artificial technology. According to historian Dr. Adrian Mayer from Stanford University, the Greeks knew exactly what was coming with driverless cars and modern tech. But how could that be possible? Dr. Mayer claims you only need to look at the Greek god of the forge to understand what he's talking about. Hephaestus, god of metalworking and craftsmen, created an automaton of his own. Over 2,000 years ago, the Greeks told myths of Hephaestus and his giant bronze robot named Talos. Dr. Mayer claims Talos was a precursor to modern androids being built by Boston Dynamics. The god of the forge didn't stop there. One of his other diabolical creations was Pandora, whom Mayer compared to a wicked AI fembot. Pandora was a replicant programmed to release evil into the human world. Hephaestus also built mechanical golden maidens who helped with his work, basically robot slaves. Hephaestus was able to program the golden maidens to act without needing instructions, making them the earliest versions of personal assistants, like Amazon's Alexa. But did the Greeks really predict robots? Or is the Stanford scientist suffering from an overactive imagination? The truth is that the Greeks were already experimenting with robots. They created the Antikythera mechanism, the very first intricate machine and the first computer. That was over 2,100 years ago. Many scholars believe if the Greeks had been left alone to continue their scientific advancements, you and I would be living in the distant future right now, with androids and flying cars. The Noras of Hama. In the city of Hama, Syria, there are a series of 17 water wheels. The water wheels are known as Noras. They were some of the earliest and most effective machines ever built by human hands. It's unclear when the ones in Hama became operational, but it was most likely by the 12th century AD. Other Noras were operational in the Roman city of Apamea as early as 350 AD. The technology was definitely known throughout the Roman era and into the Middle Ages. When Hama was captured by the expanding Arab armies in the 7th century, Arabic scientists began to improve the Noras. They built the first new and improved water wheels in Hama as a way to draw water from the river. The science behind the machine is really simple. The natural flow of the water pushed the wheels, scooping water from the river to be used in irrigation. Small compartments around the rim of each wheel collected and dumped water into an aqueduct. The aqueduct then carried water to buildings, farms on the outskirts of the city, and palace gardens. This was how people pumped water from natural sources for hundreds of years until the modern invention of hydraulic pumps. The Menga Dolmen. The Menga Dolmen has been called the greatest piece of Neolithic engineering ever. Located in Spain, the dolmen is a staggering 5,700 years old. A team of archaeologists recently analyzed the mysterious stone monument. They concluded it took a sophisticated building methodology to make. The piece of sculpted rock may have been purposely aligned in such a way that visitors were given a spectacular light show from another world. The Great Dolmen is at the top of a hill, currently one of the largest known megalithic structures in Europe. The structure is massive, with just one of its stones weighing over 100 tons. That's compared to the altar stone at Stonehenge, which only weighs 6 tons. Scientists can't figure out how these Stonehenge rocks were moved, yet the ones at Menga Dolmen were over 10 times heavier. Nobody knows how they were moved either, but it's a much more baffling mystery, especially since they were transported uphill. There was so much more going on here than just transporting heavy rocks. The new analysis of the humongous burial chamber has revealed the unique construction technique. The stones were assembled in an interlocking fashion. The way the stones connect with one another created a watertight seal. Water was unable to get through the rock, slipping down through channels to prevent erosion. This clever method undoubtedly extended the longevity of the tomb. The builders had the forethought to protect the stones from weathering and erosion for thousands of years into the future. The incredible genius of this place doesn't end there. The dolmen was positioned in such a way that when the light from the sun shone into the chamber, it created complex patterns. The builders likely did this on purpose to create an otherworldly light show inside the stone grave. The Menga Dolmen's mystery is far from solved. Scientists still don't know precisely what it was used for, other than as somebody's grave. They don't know who the grave belonged to or who the sophisticated engineers were who built this place. Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Kerma. As one of Africa's earliest civilizations, the capital of the Kerma culture was founded at least 5,500 years ago in what is now Sudan. Today, it's one of the largest archaeological sites in the sub-Saharan region known as ancient Nubia, which was known for its gold deposits, incense, ivory, and architecture. By 1700 BC, Kerma was home to at least 10,000 residents. At its peak, it was the region's most powerful urban center, boasting a royal audience hall, a palace, a mud brick temple, funerary temples, chapels, and so much more. Pottery and other items that the Kermans left behind are culturally distinct from those found in Egypt and other neighboring kingdoms. Kerman artifacts have been found more than 200 miles from Kerma, reflecting the society's far-reaching ties with other groups. But the 30,000 graves in the city's cemetery show that the civilization was not entirely free of outside influence. The Kermans adhered to a social hierarchy that may have been influenced by how the ancient Egyptians structured their society. Large tombs were surrounded by smaller burials, and some of the Kermans' royal burials feature images of the god Horus and other Egyptian deities, as well as Egyptian pottery, amulets, and scarab seals. For a time, Egypt and Kerma traded both material goods and cultural ideas. However, at some point, their relationship worsened, and the Egyptians sacked the city around 1500 BC. Kerma was absorbed and went on to serve as the headquarters for several of the new kingdom's rulers. Nineveh. The ancient Assyrian city of Nineveh was located on the outskirts of Mosul in what is now Iraq. It was established as early as 6000 BC during the late Neolithic period. Over the years, it became a major religious center devoted to the Mesopotamian goddess Ishtar. It was built along a fault line, and so the walled city experienced numerous earthquakes, including one that destroyed the temple to Ishtar. Nineveh, nevertheless, became a great cultural and educational hub, serving as the capital of the Assyrian Empire for the majority of its existence. It grew to include parks, aqueducts, canals, an 80-room palace, and a library that housed 30,000 tablets. People continuously inhabited Nineveh for thousands of years, and in the 50 years leading up to its demise, it was the world's largest city. In 612 BC, a coalition of allied forces got angry and sacked and razed the ancient urban center. The intruders massacred and deported residents in large numbers. Nineveh never recovered from the construction, but it continued to function as a city in the centuries following the devastating invasion. It fell under the control of various civilizations, including the Seleucid Empire, the Parthian Empire, the Sasanian Empire, and finally the Arabs. By the 13th century, the city was reduced to mostly ruins. Today, it consists of 2 large mounds and the remains of Nineveh's massive stone and mud brick wall that was built around 700 BC. Sadly, what little is left of the settlement is being destroyed by time, weather, looters, and terrorists. Mergard. Located west of modern-day Pakistan's Indus River Valley, an archaeological site known as Mergard contains some of South Asia's earliest known evidence of farming and herding. The 300-acre Neolithic settlement sits at the foot of the Bolan Pass, which has long served as a connection between the Indus Basin and the Iranian highlands. Mergard was settled as early as 7000 BC, thousands of years before the famed Indus Valley Civilization appeared in the region. It went through 8 distinct periods of occupation, with the first inhabitants being a semi-nomadic pre-pottery culture who built mud brick homes, planted grains, and raised sheep, goats, and cattle. They memorialized their dead with elaborate burials, laying the deceased to rest with baskets, pendants, tools, and other valuable objects they had at the time, like seashells, limestone, turquoise, and sandstone. During the second phase of occupation at Mergard, people began making ceramic pottery, and the potter's wheel was introduced, significantly increasing production. The oldest human figurines in South Asia were unearthed in large numbers at the settlement, and the arrival of copper technology helped to greatly expand the site between the 4th and 7th phases of occupation. There was a lot going on here. The Mergard site was abandoned sometime between 2600 and 2000 BC, during its 7th period of occupation. Its residents re-established a new settlement 5 miles away in the larger and more fortified town of Nausharo. French archaeologists discovered Mergard in 1974, while searching for the root of the Indus Valley Civilization. While little is known about the ancient people who lived here, it's clear based on the evidence that they were advanced for their time and worshipped a god of some sort. Research into these ancient cities also shows that the developments like agriculture and raising livestock do not have a single origin, but developed independently in various places. The Etruscans. What we know today as Italy's Tuscany region was once called Eretria. It was home to one of the most advanced societies that ever existed outside of Greece in the ancient world. The earliest known traces of the Etruscan civilization date back to around 900 BC, and the oldest examples of their writing originated around 700 BC. Sadly, their texts did not survive into modern times, and the closest scholars have gotten to a first-hand look at what their world was like has been through Greek and Roman sources. Even the top experts on Etruscan history only partially understand the language. There are complications that come with trying to learn about an ancient society based on what other cultures wrote about them, as you can imagine. At their peak, the Etruscans covered a large area of Italy. They learned how to mine metals, such as copper and iron, and this gave them an edge over other societies around them. They were wealthy, educated, artistic, and powerful. There is ongoing debate as to how much the Etruscans influenced Roman civilization. Rome's early kings may have been Etruscan. Ultimately, though, the Etruscan civilization fell because of increased threats from all around. They resisted the emerging power of the Roman Empire for as long as they could, but eventually surrendered. They were granted Roman citizenship around 90 BC, and in the following decades, their territory was incorporated into the Roman Empire. The Khmer. The Khmer Empire occupied modern-day Cambodia between the 9th and 15th centuries. Its capital, Angkor, served as its powerful center. At its peak, the civilization ruled over a vast swath of Southeast Asia, including what is now Vietnam, Thailand, and Laos. The Khmer were among the first ancient civilizations to develop a road system with bridges. They also built canals, hospitals, and defensive works, like stone walls, which made them extremely good at preventing foreign invasions, at least for a while. The deeply religious Hindu-Buddhist society was extraordinarily wealthy and mostly self-sufficient. Satellite imagery shows that between the 11th and 13th century, Angkor was the pre-industrial world's largest urban center. The Khmer Empire started to decline noticeably during the 14th century, and in the 15th century, the civilization had dissolved. Historians don't really have just one answer. Numerous events likely contributed to its downfall, including internal power struggles, tense relations between elites and rulers, frequent civil wars, wars with outside powers, plague, and declining harvests. Cucuteni Tripelia. Around 5,500 BC, the Neolithic Cucuteni Tripilian culture became well known when its inhabitants spread across what is now Eastern Europe, including Russia, Moldova, and Ukraine. They built Neolithic Europe's largest settlements, with populations numbering anywhere from 20,000 to 46,000. Archaeologists have discovered that they did something strange. Every 60 to 80 years, the civilization burned down its structures and built a new spot at the same site. Their phases of occupation can often be seen at archaeological sites like Poduri in Romania, where there are 13 distinct layers containing the ruins of settlements that were burned down and then built on top of. Researchers haven't figured out why the Cucuteni Tripilians did this, but it limited the amount of artifacts they left behind, to say the least. The civilization also left no signs of a written language. As a result, experts have very little to learn about them from. The few relics that were found intact include clay totems, copper tools, and spiritual objects. In the late 19th century, the first Cucuteni Tripilian communities were found. Recent findings reveal that the obscure culture played a bigger role in human advancement than it's given credit for. But because of their habit of destroying the evidence, we'll probably never know the true extent of their knowledge or capabilities. The Gira Culture. During the 3rd millennium BC, an early Bronze Age civilization called the Gira Culture emerged in what is now Iran's Halil River Valley. They built a sprawling urban settlement that was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides and consisted of 2 large burial mounds, a fortified citadel, and numerous smaller buildings. The Gira people enjoyed a sophisticated lifestyle and a complex social hierarchy that put them ahead of other societies of their time. They practiced a religion and crafted vases, statues, and other fine goods. The civilization peaked sometime between 2500 and 2200 BC, after which point they experienced some sort of decline and abandoned their city. Over time, the villages they left behind were either buried in the sand or forgotten. After being rediscovered during the early 20th century, the Gira sites were excavated several times. In the meantime, they fell victim to looters, leaving behind a very limited array of artifacts, so we know very little about them. What we do know is that they were a distinct group with their own unique language, spiritual beliefs, architecture, and a writing system consisting of geometric figures. Many researchers believe that the society may be one of the so-called cradles of civilization, representing one of the first places on Earth where a complex culture developed. Some even speculate that the Gira culture was just as great as the Sumerians or ancient Mesopotamia. The Vinka Civilization. Also known as the Danube Valley Civilization, the Vinka Civilization was a Neolithic culture that lived throughout parts of southeastern Europe, including what are now Serbia, Kosovo, Bulgaria, Romania, and Macedonia. Dating as far back as 7000 BC, the Vinka are widely considered to be the cradle of European civilization. They made numerous advancements that put them far ahead of other cultures at the time, including building some of the region's largest prehistoric settlements, fueling a population boom and further developing farming after it was introduced in the area. In addition to planting crops and raising livestock, the Vinka plowed their fields and used copper silverware 1,000 years before doing so became common in Europe. They were not politically unified. However, they preserved cultural solidarity by exchanging ceremonial items over a huge network of villages. The Vinka used a collection of around 700 symbols, including zoomorphic and anthropomorphic figures. Some scholars consider it to be one of the world's oldest writing systems. Layers of evidence found at some Vinka spots indicate a period of occupation lasting over 1,000 years. Their reasons for eventually abandoning these sites remain a mystery. The Axumites. The Axumite Empire is one of the least documented civilizations. Historians know little about it, and the reasons for its collapse are a mystery. From around 80 AD until it met its mysterious downfall in 825, they occupied Eritrea and Ethiopia, as well as parts of Djibouti, Somalia, and Somaliland. The Kingdom of Aksum gained its power as a major player along a commercial trade route linking the Roman Empire with ancient India. Using its far-reaching political power, it influenced societies as far away as the Arabian Peninsula, which was located across the Red Sea. Aksum was also the first sub-Saharan empire to mint its own coins and adopt Christianity. During the early 7th century, the Axumites stopped making new currency. Around the same time, residents were forced to flee inland, where they sought refuge on higher ground from some sort of upheaval. The capital was abandoned and resettled at an unknown location. According to legend, a Jewish queen named Yodit, or Judith, ordered the burning of Aksum's Christian churches around 960, but many historians question whether this story is true, or if Yodit even existed to begin with. Another story claims that a pagan queen from a rival tribe named Bani al-Hamwiya was responsible for ending the Aksumites' power. Climate may have also been a factor. During the 1st century, it rained more than usual, increasing the region's food supply. But there was a huge population to support, and it's possible that the land could no longer handle the intense farming that was required to keep people fed. Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans were Greek-speaking immigrants who arrived in the Aegean region around 2000 BC and subsequently conquered the Minoans after living alongside them and trading with them for some time. The newcomers harvested food from the sea and grew grapes and olives in the dry, rocky soil. They frequently raided other societies like the Hittites and Egyptians. The Mycenaeans built heavily fortified settlements, and through their plundering they became wealthy, and the civilization flourished between 1600 BC and 1200 BC, before unexplainably collapsing at its peak, when people began leaving the region in droves. Some scholars concede that we may never know why the Mycenaeans disappeared. There are numerous theories, including the realistic possibility that the society's violence against others finally caught up with it. Natural disasters, possibly including an earthquake and/or a volcanic eruption, may have also ended the civilization. Drought, famine, civil uprising, and financial devastation are also possible factors. The Shu Kingdom. The Shu Kingdom was one of the very first highly advanced societies in ancient China, and just recently, archaeologists have discovered even more remarkable things in the Sanqingdui ruins in China's southwestern Sichuan province. They found a bronze altar and a carved dragon with the nose of a pig in sacrificial pits. Archaeologists announced these as significant discoveries, although there have been way more things found over the years. Thousands of artifacts, including strange figurines carved like aliens, and jade relics have been pulled out of nearly a dozen sacrificial pits, and researchers are still trying to make sense of it all. The Shu Kingdom ruled this great city about 4,500 years ago. They made great headway with architecture and art and flourished for about 2,000 years. Then they mysteriously vanished and their city was abandoned. A farmer rediscovered the city in the 1920s, and since excavations started in the 1980s, about 13,000 artifacts have been found. What's truly amazing is that these people made sculptures unlike anything else made by any other civilization. Zhao Hao, an associate professor at Peking University, calls their art style complex and imaginative, and says their sculptures reflect the mystifying fairy world that they believed in.
Others think their curious style of artwork came from an unexpected meeting with extraterrestrials thousands of years ago. Perhaps the most mysterious thing of all is that even though the Shu Kingdom was so advanced, they didn't leave behind any written records. We can only guess at what was happening in one of China's first great civilizations, up until they left 3,000 years ago. Some scholars believe it was an earthquake that caused them to abandon the city and move to Jinsha, where a new culture emerged: the people of the canyon. The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long and up to 18 miles wide in some places. It's arguably the most beautiful and exotic place in all of the United States, and according to some, it was also once home to a secret underground civilization. We don't actually have any proof that this civilization exists, other than a vague report in a newspaper from 1909. An explorer and anthropologist who supposedly worked for the Smithsonian Institution, a man by the name of G.E. Kincaid, discovered a group of strange caverns through an almost inaccessible entrance located halfway up a canyon wall. Inside the cavern was evidence of an ancient society: statues made of stone, granaries full of seeds, copper weaponry, and enough space to fit about 50,000 people. Even stranger is the fact that the artifacts didn't appear to match anything on record. They looked nothing like artifacts left behind by the native Hopi Indians who have lived in the area for thousands of years. The explorers reported that the objects appeared to be Egyptian or even Tibetan, but there is no evidence the Egyptians ever made it to North America. Plus, why would they have lived in this small cave and not gone out into the actual canyon lands? It's a huge mystery and one that has never been solved. The Smithsonian Institution has no record of Kincaid, nor do they support the idea of Egyptian artifacts in the Grand Canyon. Most people believe it to be a hoax, a made-up story on par with Area 51 and its underground prison of aliens. The Fiana. In Irish mythology, there is arguably nobody more important than Finn McCool. He may have been a real person, or maybe he wasn't. It's hard to tell with myths that are this old, but according to the stories that have been passed down from generation to generation, Finn was the first ruler and greatest of the Fiana, a group of tribal warriors who roamed from Ireland to the Isle of Man. These warriors hunted in large bands throughout the Iron Age and all the way into the early Middle Ages. They lived in the wild, hunted and raided small communities. They were basically like nomadic mercenaries. However, it's extremely difficult to separate fact from fiction here. There are thousands of tales of the Fiana, both fantastical and some more rooted in reality. Most scholars believe it was actually a rite of passage to join the Fiana, and one could only settle down and become a farmer after they had spent their youth pillaging. One thing that's for sure is that the Fiana existed in some capacity or another. We know they were raiding Britain at the end of Roman rule when the British Isle was plunged into chaos. And according to History of Ireland, written in the 17th century by Geoffrey Keating, the Fiana were actually respected by the nobility. During the winter months, British nobles would feed and house the Fiana in exchange for their warrior services. But in the summer and autumn, they would flee back into the wild and raid whomever they pleased. The Tartes Civilization. The Tartes Civilization existed way back in the 9th century BC in southwestern Spain. They prospered for about 300 years along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. But what's really fascinating is that even to the ancient people of Europe, Tartessos was considered a place of great riches and legends. Even in the 1st century BC, not long after the Tartessos had vanished, adventurers made journeys to the area in hopes of finding lost cities. It was to the people of antiquity what places like El Dorado and Atlantis are to us today. Interestingly enough, the wealth of this advanced civilization was even mentioned several times in the Bible. The people of Tartessos were supposedly great builders. They had amassed a huge fortune through unknown means, and they were wildly powerful. But we didn't actually find any physical trace of them until near the end of the 20th century. Only recently did we find the remains of their cities. What archaeologists have been able to put together is a brief timeline of this lost culture. They believe that Tartessos were actually just the Phoenicians who started populating the Spanish coastline in the 9th century BC. The mining was so good in the area that they traded precious metals across the world and became extremely wealthy. They became so wealthy that the region of Tartessos took on a legendary status, completely removed from the Phoenicians themselves. That being said, researchers do say there was likely an indigenous group living in the area, who very well may have been the real Tartessos culture, although they would have gotten rich along with the Phoenicians from trading. Everything started going downhill in the 6th century BC for unknown reasons. Archaeologists have found abandoned villages that existed for less than 50 years, mines that closed up and were deserted, as if the entire industry had come to a sudden and grinding halt. The ancient Persians. The Persians were the very first global superpower. They made plenty of advancements in technology and architecture, but it was the sheer size of Persia and its great armies that really made it the world's first force to be reckoned with. It flourished for less than 500 years, even less time than Rome, and yet they left a lasting imprint on human history. Yes, the Romans conquered pretty much all of Europe, but the Persians did their conquering in a different way and in a different area. They stretched all the way from the eastern edge of the Mediterranean to India and absorbed all the cultures in between. According to Taraj Darye, an expert in Persian studies at the University of California, Persia really was the first world empire. This was because it included within its kingdom parts of Africa, Asia, and Europe, a little piece of everywhere. Unlike Rome, Persia did not fall because they stretched themselves too thin. Rather, they destroyed themselves by going to war with Athens and Sparta. They lost the first invasion even though they vastly outnumbered their enemy, beaten back by the Spartans and the Athenians. When the Persians attacked again, they were repelled yet again. They had brought the biggest army ever seen to the doors of Greece, but just like their first endeavor, they were thrown back. And so, in 334 BC, it was no problem for Alexander the Great to squash the Persians once and for all. The Dilmon Civilization. A recent archaeological dig in Bahrain has unveiled one of the oldest civilizations in human history. The dig was done at the site of Sar, where one of the earliest trading cultures dwelled thousands of years ago. Researchers believe Sar was home to the Dilmon Civilization. The Dilmun society dates back to around 3000 BC, and Sar was a major trading post. The settlement can be divided into two parts, a residential zone and a small cemetery. Because of their strategic place in Bahrain, they would have had access to the trade coming in from the Indus Valley Civilization and from all the people of South Asia. This would have been like a connecting point, picking up goods from civilizations as far away as southern India, while also having access to lands in the north beyond Turkey. One of the things that makes this civilization so impressive is just how many cities they built. Sar is only one of many across much of Bahrain, and almost all of the other Dilmun cities were built to withstand invasion. They had huge pillars, outer walls that enclosed the entire city, and even built them over underground springs to provide fresh flowing water to everyone. Liangzhu Jade. The Liangzhu archaeological site can be found in the Yangtze River Basin of China. A group of mysterious mounds were discovered back in 1936, and excavations over the next several decades revealed impressive burial complexes. These strange underground tombs were filled with ritual jade objects, ceremonial tools, and treasures made from stone and pottery. We now know that the people who dug these graves were from a Neolithic Jade culture, identified by their early development of jade objects. Still, we don't exactly have a name for these people. They simply happen to be a group of early humans in China who were among the first to practice sophisticated jade craftsmanship. They then used their jade ornaments as decorations for tombs and as offerings during burial rituals. In fact, 75% of jade found has been inside burial mounds. The rest appears to have been reserved for royalty. For example, the jade trident plaque is an artifact totally unique to the Liangzhu culture. It's a remarkable headpiece that had once been attached to a crown, a three-pronged chunk of jade like Poseidon's helmet. As for what happened to the Liangzhu, they vanished around 2300 BC and were the very last of the Neolithic cultures in China. The ancient Celts. The ancient Celts were the largest and most widespread group in ancient Europe. You probably hear the term Celt a lot, and it might make you think of Irish people or the British Celts from before the time of Christ. But in truth, the Celts were everywhere, from Britain to Russia. But the Celtic people never would have called themselves Celts. The name was given to them by the Greeks when they first came across people they took for barbarians in the year 540 BC. The Greeks called them Keltoi, and the name stuck for all the wild people outside of the Mediterranean region. Also, the Celts never shared a single kingdom or even a common goal. Instead, they were the most advanced collection of tribal chiefdoms in human history. There were hundreds upon hundreds of tribes across Europe, and although they didn't have a king and they didn't live in castles, they shared a single culture and a very distinct language. They were, for all intents and purposes, one people. This technically makes them the largest complex society in the ancient world. The Salado. In the Tonto Basin in the United States, located in both Arizona and New Mexico, there was a great culture that flourished up until around 600 years ago. They were called the Salado culture, and they were around between 1200 and 1450 AD. Nobody knows exactly where they came from or where they went when they disappeared. That said, they were without a doubt the most advanced civilization to live in this dry and arid wasteland before Europeans. The Salado had very distinctive artwork. Their architecture was unlike anything else in the world, and their burial practices even separated them from the Anasazi. This is the biggest shock, since the Anasazi lived not too far away in Utah and on the other sides of Arizona and New Mexico. Yet the Salado and the Anasazi were wildly different, even with little land separating them. Humans were actually hunting mammoths in the Tonto Basin in 5000 BC, so the Salado definitely weren't the first people around. Also, indigenous groups built cliff dwellings here as far back as 3500 BC. Then, permanent occupation was made by the Mogollon people, and later the Hohokam, who lived in the basin right at the heart of what is now Phoenix, Arizona, for about 300 years. They fled around 1150, and the Salado came after. As you can see, there is a rich and diverse history here. It's highly probable the Salado are the most famous because they were the most recent. They built fantastic houses, cremated and buried their dead with great honors, and left behind some of the most artistic pieces of pottery of any native group. Sadly, they fled the area for unknown reasons in 1450, and nobody knows what became of them. The Hallstatt culture. The Hallstatt culture is one you may have never heard of, most likely because they dominated a very small piece of Europe for a very small period of time. The culture is actually named after the Hallstatt archaeological site in Austria. They flourished here from between the 8th and 6th century BC, although they may have been there earlier in a more primitive capacity since 1200 BC. The Hallstatt are unique, though not as unique as some of the earlier cultures. They had a lot in common with other people in Europe during the Iron Age. These were Proto-Celtic cultures. The one thing that really separates the Hallstatt from others is the reason behind their rise to power and their immediate fall from grace. They learned how to exploit natural resources with shocking efficiency. In particular, they realized how to pull salt from the earth and refine it for sale throughout Europe. They grew wildly wealthy just by trading salt. But then, around the year 500 BC, the salt ran out. They didn't have enough salt to stay in power, and rival trading centers were springing up everywhere in competition. Within just a few years, the Hallstatt culture was gone. Thanks for watching! Which of these ancient cultures do you think was the most impressive? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe and come back soon. See you next time. Bye!